In this episode, I speak with the fascinating Ryan and Sophie from Ryan and Sophie Sailing. They have an incredible YouTube channel and they have the most amazing story to share about their adventures sailing the world, going from normal life and just an idea and a crazy goose encounter, which you'll hear the story. The two set out on the adventure of a lifetime, and of course, anxiety, stress, near death experiences, all of it came along with them. And they've certainly got some wisdom to share, both being familiar with the experience of high functioning anxiety. I love that they are such wonderful examples of what is possible, even when you have the fear. You'd look at these people and you'd think, oh my gosh, they are so brave, they are so courageous. How is it that they've done all these amazing things and conquered so much? They've done it with the fear. And certainly they have some lessons to share from the road, from living in such incredible circumstances. You're going to love this episode. If you enjoyed my episode with Sarah Andrews, where she tells a story about being shipwrecked by hitting a whale when she was asleep in the middle of the night. It's a fascinating story. Go back, find the episode with Sarah Andrews. You are going to love this episode too. I had the best time chatting with Ryan and Sophie. Okay, let's go to the show. Welcome, Ryan and Sophie. Really excited to explore your story and share it with everyone today because you're speaking to such an important message. This idea of the grass is always greener, and you guys actually looked at that greener grass. You went for it and learnt some things along the way, and I'm just really looking forward to sharing those lessons with everyone here. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Georgie.
Yeah, so great to meet you. Okay, so take us back. Where were you before you decided to go off sailing the world?
Well, it all goes back to 2015 when Ryan and I first met on Tinder. And I think that pretty quickly we knew that we wanted to have some adventures together, which is weird when you meet a total stranger on the dating app. But that's what happened. And at that time, both Ryan and I were in the corporate world. We both worked in startups, in sales, and we had really busy lifestyles where, on the outside, everything looked fine. We had good salaries. We were traveling a lot, business traveling as well. And, I think that we were both pretty successful in what we did, but I think that both of us felt very unfulfilled by our careers and by our jobs. And, when you hit your 30s, things feel a bit different. You get to that point where you ask yourself, is that it? Is this how life is going to look like? Am I going to be sitting at this office chasing the next promotion and the next raise until I hit retirement? And then one day, well, Ryan has a bit of a funny story about it, but one day Ryan texted me and asked, hey, like, I read this article about a couple our age and they sold everything, they quit their job, they bought a boat and they went sailing. And I was like, yes, I think that I need to explore something different.
Wow.
Maybe it will work, maybe it will not, but let's explore an alternative lifestyle, at least for a bit.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. And was this something that, did you have any hesitations around it, or was it just like a yes straight away for you?
so, I think that with every big lifestyle change, it doesn't happen from one day to the other, right? Like you first have the idea, you think about it, and then you make small steps towards your goal. It took us 3 years from first thinking about 2 years, sorry, between thinking about it first and then leaving the dock. And so in between those two moments, there is a lot of things that happens in your head. And I think that you and I, Ryan, were fairly committed right from the get-go. But
Yeah.
along the way, we asked ourselves a lot of questions because, of course, you're going to ask yourself questions. It's healthy to do. Um, so I don't think there were like real hesitations when we thought about, you know, we got to try this. But it was more, okay, are we doing the right thing on in every step of the way?
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
say that we had probably like a few, like there's different phases that you go through. So we were like really excited about the project first, and then there's
Mm-mm.
always you get over that piece, the excitement, and then the questions start popping into your mind. And then the day or the week or the month that you're supposed to leave, that's when like all the doubt really hits you. And so, like I think that Sophie and I kind of ping ponged back and forth a little bit about who was like really excited about doing it and who wasn't. We kind of like went through changes, and then once we actually left, I personally went through a big thing where it's like, I don't even know if I want to be doing this right now, because we have a lot of other stuff going on, and we were told by some friends, like in a project like this, it doesn't have to be sailing, it could be any big life change, but for us, the quote was, the hardest thing is to leave the dock. That is the hardest thing to do. So the first time, and she's like, in order to be successful, you just need to leave. And if you just leave the dock and go out into the bay and anchor, you've left and you're successful with your project. And that's essentially what we did. um, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it was kind of like we went through very like variety of stages individually through the project as we started.
So you broke it down into that achievable first step. It was like, let's just leave and see how we feel, and we can always turn back if we want, kind of thing. Ryan,
That's
what
right.
was the glistening like excitement behind sailing the world for you?
Ironically, there was no excitement. I had never wanted to be on a sailboat. In fact, I think on the second
What?
date I had with Sophie, I told her, yeah, one day I'm going to own a yacht, in a very cocky way, probably. But my vision of that was a, very large motor yacht where we had crew and it would be very exciting. But here we are with a yacht, and we have to crew it. No, what happened was I was always a big adventurer, and I was a mountain climber. Both Sophie and I were endurance athletes, so we had like this drive for more, and to push ourselves. And what happened was, I had gone back to the States. Sophie and I live in Sweden, and I had gone back to help my parents with some medical things. And while I was home, I I was out for a run one day, and I got attacked by a Canadian goose while I was running. And in the process of that attack, I fell and I dislocated my shoulder and I broke the socket bone.
What?
So yeah, so I
This is
got beat. For
what?
It's a real
This
story.
is this
Yeah,
is our origin story, Georgie,
yeah.
and the villain is a goose.
The
That
villain
is
is the goose.
like, how is that even? That's so
It
cool. That sounds like something
they're
out of like
vicious.
a
They're vicious
comedy.
creatures. They're vicious creatures, these Canadian geese.
And so,
So
what happened to you, Ryan? You really injured yourself.
yeah, quite badly. I had to go to the emergency room. They had to like put me under, and then to get the arm back in the socket. And then I flew back to Sweden like a few days later, so I didn't really get to help my parents out with what they needed. And 2 weeks later, they had to rebuild my entire shoulder. So all of the athletic things that I was doing, I was training for some big mountains. I was hoping to go to the South Pole. All of that was done. I couldn't do it anymore because it was going to be about a 2-year recovery. I mean, the first 6 months I was learning how just to use my arm again, how to pick it up on itself. And so that was a really depressing time for me, because I'm a person that likes to be moving, likes to be active, and I couldn't. I was sitting there at my office desk with my arm strapped to my chest, and I couldn't move it. So I was just surfing the web one day, and I read this story about a couple named Matt and Jessica. They're still out sailing. We're in contact with them, ironically. But it was a story on Board Panda about how they were about to buy a house, and one day Matt came home and said, well, why don't we just buy a sailboat? And they sold everything and they bought this boat, and they've just been sailing since then. And that thought had never occurred to me.
Mhm.
So right when I read that article, I sent it to Sophie, and Sophie was like, yeah, I would do this. And that's what started it. There was no other drive. Like, it wasn't a lifelong dream. It was just this goose attack and an article we read.
Wow. So life really threw you a curveball with that goose attack.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I never knew Canadian geese could be like that.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy. And so you just had this moment of like, wow, I've never thought that way before, and just saw outside the box.
Well, ironically, like the thing I thought about it was like, oh yeah, cool. We could buy a boat. It'd be really cheap to live. It doesn't cost anything. The wind will take us anywhere. And that's like the furthest thing from the truth in this life. So anybody who's a sailor listening to this will be laughing. But that was kind of like the, oh yeah, that'd be cool. We could like live really cheap. We could see the world. Um, And part of that story is true, yeah, and that's kind of what drove us into it.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful. I love that you went into it. Like, we all have these dreams, these fantasies that occur to us every now and then where we're like, wonder if I just did that. That could be so cool. We all go into it with a sense of naivety and a sense of like, this is going to fix my life, or this is going to be
Mm-mm.
the dream. And from there, it's all going to be
Mm.
smooth sailing, pun totally
yeah,
intended.
Da, da,
I think
da.
that one other thing that Sophie and I don't talk about very often is that, you know, the original project was we were just going to sail for a year and go around the Atlantic, and now we're 4 years living on the boat, and so we've kept going. But one of the things that us deciding to do that project, what you know, get on the boat and do this, was we needed to break away from life for a while. And I think, as I said, we don't talk about it a lot, but in that process, in the 2 years kind of leading up before we left, we ended up both quitting our jobs, starting our own businesses, or getting involved in businesses that we had started. And so I think that the boat subconsciously kind of mentally had us breaking away. And so in that period that we were getting ready to leave, we were kind of like arranging our lives to do this. And it forced us into different thinking just in general.
Mm.
And caused us to take just a totally different career path on top of everything, of top of just doing this quote 1 year project that's now 4.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, I think that's something important too. It just really changed our mindset as we were going.
You would have really had to practice a lot of surrendering to just like, look, we'll just start and we'll just see what happens along the way and ultimately adapt to what challenges might arise. Is that sort of how you thought about it as you went into it?
Yeah, I think that the one good thing that we did when we get started was that we really broke the project down into several steps and we reassessed at every step of the way. So first we took a course and we told ourselves we're not going to buy a boat before we know actually what it's like to sail. So we did that, we reassessed, we were okay with buying a boat, then we bought the boat. And then we told ourselves we're going to do one season of sailing with our boat and see how it feels. And after one season, we felt that we were not quite ready to leave yet. So we waited another year. And during that year, as Ryan mentioned, that's when we started our businesses and also dealt with other issues that arise. And on this third year, we felt a lot more ready. And on this third year of sailing, we actually decided that we were going to leave, but for 6 months. So now it was not 1 year anymore, it was 6 months. And we were just going to stay a little closer to home. We were going to stay in Europe. And then after 6 months, we reassessed. Um, and in the last 7 years that we've been doing this has been our motto all the time. All right, we're going to do this, see how it feels, reassess, make new goals. And I think that it's something that we've been doing right, Ryan.
Yeah. Uh,
If you could go back to, say, the version of you like 10 years ago, what do you think that version of you would have? Like, was this anywhere within your idea of how your life was going to go?
I want to say yes. I've always known that I wanted to live a big adventure. I never knew how exactly it was going to look, but I knew that eventually I wanted to make a big life change and be adventurous.
Mm.
yeah,
I never knew that it was going to be on a boat, though.
I think Sophie and I, you kind of look at people's personalities and what they do in the past. So Sophie, when she was 21, 22 years old, packed up and moved to Sweden from France. When I was 28, I packed up from the US and moved to Sweden. And you know, to take on new things, and those adventures are scary enough. Just a move, like even to move across the state or to a different city is big. And then moving to a different country is a big thing. So I think there's just something in people that do that that drive them to explore new things. And so I think it was probably inevitable that something like this would happen, whether or not it would go down this path. Could have
Yeah.
gone down many paths, I suppose, but this is where we are. So
Now, the people listening into this podcast are women with high functioning anxiety, women who are like, you know, want probably likely have big dreams, have a lot of things they want to do, but really feel that self-doubt and that anxiety and the fear get in the way, and the mind's very good at jumping onto those worst case scenarios and how it could be go wrong. And I'm included in that as someone who's very much experienced that way of seeing the world. And yet I can also relate because I have done a few adventures overseas myself, living in other parts of the world. Right now I'm in Portugal and I've sort of moved myself here as well. So I can so relate, but I'm also aware that from an outside perspective, it could so easily look like that's just easy and it's just built into
Mm-hmm.
you and there's no fear along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little insight into that anxiety that comes along with these kind of adventures? So even if it's like always been, your way of like wanting an adventure, and you too, Ryan, I'm interested to hear.
Okay, well, first off, if you're a woman with high functioning anxiety, well, hello, friend. Uh,
Yes. Hi, friends. You're in the right place.
um, it can be very difficult when you live with anxiety and, history of chronic depression to live a life in which you are essentially disconnected from a support system. And every time that you get to a new place, so right now you're in Portugal, so you moved yourself. And this is like essentially the premise of our lives, right? A month ago, we were in Antigua in the Caribbean. Today, we are in Bermuda. In 1 month, we are going to be in Canada. And it can be difficult to have this life in which every month or every so often you get to a place where you don't know anything about and you have to learn everything from scratch. It's emotionally very tiring, and you are disconnected. And I think that in those moments, it is ever so important to accept the fact that there will be days that you feel bad, and always remind yourself that it has nothing to do with you. Um, I still to this day, at night will have a lot of anxiety. If I wake up at 1 a.m., I'm probably guaranteed to have some sort of a nightmare, and to have thoughts that attach to my mind and that will pop up back at 1 a.m. in the morning, only to find that at 3 p.m. the next day, I'm okay. Everything works, but it's always in the background. And I don't think that there is a magic cure, or anything that makes it go away, but just to acknowledge that it's here and that it's okay. And that's actually a lot of people live that way, you know
Yeah.
and it
And so,
doesn't need to be a preventing factor.
yes, that's the thing. So you haven't let it stop you from, even though it's scary, the concept of being cut off from family, friends, moving around all of the time, not having, your local grocery store, your local doctor, like all of those things that can make us feel safe and secure, knowing what your routine's going to look like week to week or month to month even. But you haven't let that stop you, which I think is
No.
really interesting. Do you feel that having that fear and those thoughts and yet still taking the action has been really a help to you?
Yes, absolutely. I think that in the first 2 years before we took the big plunge and left, it felt like absolutely unachievable to manage a new lifestyle. And at that time, mind you, I was absolutely unaware of what that lifestyle would involve and the impact that it would have on anxiety or chronic depression, because I didn't realize that it was going to disconnect me as much as it did from my then support network. I have a new one now.
Yeah.
But when you overcome so much and you still achieve your goals, even though anxiety will tell you, oh, but no, like you're not as good as you think. I often live with imposter syndrome, or the feeling that I'm failing, which is insane when you objectively look at how much we have accomplished in the last 7 years. But having that thought to get back to that, no, actually look back. Like, you don't have to look at the future or what's going ahead, but if you look back at how much you've achieved in the last years, it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Yes, and it's okay. That's going to look different to everyone else, that
Yeah.
idea of success and what you can be proud of in
Yes.
life you don't have to pack
Exactly.
up your whole world and go overseas.
No.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sophie, because there'd be so many people watching you just being like, oh, she's so brave. She's so great. How does she do that when she must have superhuman strength? And it's like, no, you still have the thoughts,
Oh
but
yeah.
don't let them control you. And Ryan, how can you relate to this? Is this something that you've experienced too?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Probably on the same level as Sophie. We always tell people that there's three things you need to sort before you do. It could be this type of project or any project. And the first is you got to figure out the boat, um, or like what you're going to do your adventure on. The second piece is you got to figure out your finances.
I think that we're losing Ryan a little bit.
Yes. Are you guys, where are
And
you
the
both located? Are you in different spaces right now?
third piece, which is the piece that everybody
Ooh.
Oh,
forgets,
here he's
and how are
back.
you going to manage yourself? And all right, I'm sorry, I had some good things to say. My
That's
my
okay,
phone went.
Ryan. Let's go back. I think we
Okay,
had the first one was you've got to know your boat and your plan.
got to know your boat and your plan. You've got to know the finances of how you're going to manage a project like this. And then the third, and is the piece that everybody forgets, is yourself and your relationship and the people that you're going to do it with. And Sophie and I are a bit guilty of, I mean, we were working on ourselves and our relationship before we left, but it's really more important when you're living in a space. So a boat is unique because it's also moving all the time. So you can't, there might be a day that you've had a really bad day, you've been really anxious, and then all you want to do is get a good night's sleep. And all that's happening, like last night was a good example for us, is it's just windy, the waves are crashing against the boat, everything's moving, and you can't get a break. So you don't get to always pick the
The
times which you get to,
circumstances.
yeah, the times which you get to relax or get to have that mental break. You have to find when those are coming and take advantage of them, which is a lot different
Yeah.
than in normal life. um, for me personally, what I have experienced, because I also have a lot of anxiety about things, especially keeping Sophie and I safe, um, is that in this world, and it's not, I come from a flying background, so I was a pilot before, and it's the same in that world. A lot of that type A high speed world where it's male dominated,
Yeah.
is there's no room in this world for men to express anxiety or fear that they have. And because this is actually very scary sometimes, you're like, going into marinas can be scary if it's really windy. We just went through a tropical storm here in Antigua, or I'm sorry, in Bermuda where we are, and that was the first one that we have been through, and that was very scary. And to have other guys to sit around and talk to about like how you're feeling is very hard to find in this world, because a lot of people, like a lot of the older male generation that are sailors, are like, well, you're just weak, you don't belong out on the sea. And it's not true.
Yeah.
They probably feel the same, they just don't feel like they can talk about it. And that was the same in the flying world that I came from as well. It can be very scary sometimes, and you just don't have an outlet for it. um, so I think that kind of circles back to the whole idea of like, you need to take care of yourself and think about
Yeah.
how you're going to take care of yourself before you start a project like this.
Yeah.
Totally. I appreciate that so much. And you know, the absence of fear is not a brave person. Like, to be honest,
Yeah.
if you had no fear, like if we could just take that, like, the fear center out of your brain, the amygdala, like it would, well, firstly, you'd probably not survive very long, but also, like, that doesn't make you brave. You're not overcoming anything. It's having the fear and taking the action anyway, and not letting the fear-based thoughts control you, I think is the real key. It's like, if you've got tons of fear, like if you have it doesn't matter what it is. Like for some people, they're scared to leave their own house. Like they're scared to just carry out a normal day because the fear is so intense. And it's like, if you actually go outside and get on with your day, if you get out the door today and you get yourself in the shower and do your things, that can still be an amazing achievement considering how much
Mhm.
fear is there.
Yeah.
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 And I think that in this life, because sailing is a high risk activity, we've learned to differentiate the bad fear from the good fear. Like the bad fear is the fear that prevents you to do something that is good for you, that you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And the bad fear and the good fear is the fear of something like actually legit that you probably need to listen to. It's knowing your boundaries,
Yes.
right? Like it's completely legitimate to be scared of a wave that is 6 meters high. Or like a couple of days ago, Ryan and I were in our dinghy, which is the little boat that we go to shore with, and there was a giant container ship that left the dock right at that moment and arrived on us and honked at us like this massive giant thing. And we're a slow little boat.
Oh my God.
That's genuine. That's good fear. You know, you should be scared of that. And so if you can sit a minute and ask yourself, okay, is the fear that I'm feeling good or bad? And can I get over this fear? Can I overcome it? And I think that another thing that we need to think about to remember beyond differentiating good and bad fear is there anything I can do about it? Right? Like I'm scared right now, so I'm frozen. But is there something that I can do to manage that? And it's okay, you know, sometimes the first time that you're scared of something to be frozen, but then maybe you can continue. And the next time you're going to feel a little bit better because you've gone out of your comfort zone. And now it feels a little more familiar.
Yeah. Do you think having those regular reminders of legitimate life and death fear, the good fear, is almost helpful for the bad fear because you're kind of like, well, yesterday we nearly died. So today that I'm just worried that, what are people going to think of me? It doesn't seem like such a big thing, right? Or I
I
got this
wish
like, a troll online or I don't know, or like whatever it might be.
I wish it worked like that. I haven't found that it works a lot for me. But sometimes I think that it, lowers the threshold for not how much I can take, but it expands my comfort zone. So
Yes.
Ryan mentioned last week that we went through a tropical storm and we were on anchor, sustaining very high winds, and we were like genuinely afraid for our boat and what was going to happen to us in this big storm that we spent on anchor. But I found that, once you're in it, like you're afraid of it before, but then once you're in it, you're like, okay, the boat is safe. We've prepared. We've done good. We are safe. And so with that, I'm like, okay, no, we've done this. I can do it again. I don't need to, we're going to do everything we can to never go through that again. But it works. We're okay. Our preparations have worked. We can do this.
I'm gonna ask you just what the scariest thing, one of the scariest things you've ever been through in the last 4 years has been. But before I do, whether it's the other week or something else, but before I do, I'd love to get like a little idea of where you've sailed to over the last 4 years. Like you don't have to
Hmm.
name every place, but just what's the outline of that route you've taken?
So we started in Stockholm, Sweden, in Europe, went down the Baltic, through the North Sea to France, down to the Mediterranean. And inside the Mediterranean, we went as far as Malta through the Balearics, Corsica, Sardinia, turned around down across the Atlantic via the Canary Islands and Cape Verde, in the Caribbean. And then we did an Atlantic circuit that took us north to Bermuda, the Azores, back to the Canary Islands, back across the Caribbean. And we are currently back from the Caribbean to Bermuda. So yeah.
Wow. How long does it take to get from like the Canary Islands to the Caribbean?
So by boat,
Yeah.
it takes anywhere between 2 weeks and a month,
And that's no
depending on.
land that whole time?
Okay, so that depends on if you stop or not. So typically you're going to start in the Canary Islands. Some people choose to go straight from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean, which would take you between 2 and 3 weeks without seeing land on the boat. But you can also cut the trip and stop in Cape Verde, which is a small archipelago west of Africa. And it's going to cut the trip down. And you can do that crossing between, I don't know, a week and 2 weeks
But
by boat.
you're still a whole week or two out to sea without
Oh,
seeing.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
if it's
you're
going to take you a
properly
week, it's a fast one.
it's
Yeah.
it's you're properly in the middle of like actual
Yes.
nowhere.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So what's been one of the scariest things you've been through, other than like, I'm sure there's been a few storms, but that one recently, or
Storms are not that scary, Ryan. What would you say at sea? Because we avoid them. We won't
Yeah,
go at
I
sea
mean,
when there is a storm.
forecasting good, and we were in one semi big thing that we accidentally put ourselves in, um, which we had some crew on, and it wasn't pleasant. We were all
It was
sick,
not great.
but we managed, and it's as Sophie says, like as you get going, um, there's anxiety buildup before you go, and then once you're in things, you just deal with it, and because you have to, and the anxiety kind of goes away, and you get into like focus mode, and the mentality shifts. And then afterwards, you're just tired.
yeah.
So I
This
I don't know. Maybe we answer this separately because I think we might
No,
have
I
much
think that
different answers.
the scary things are when something that you haven't foreseen happens. So, for example, on our last sail between Antigua and Bermuda, it's 8 days at sea. Same thing, you don't see land, you're properly offshore, nowhere to go. We had no wind, so we have to be on the engine in those moments. And all of a sudden, the engine stops. And that is because we have caught a giant fishing net in our propeller, and that needs to go. And so, in the middle of the night, Brian had to jump in the water, which is dangerous, swim under the boat to go untie that fishing net.
Did he have a
And
torch?
Yeah.
yes, so we have
Yeah.
underwater lights. We went and had the GoPro go first to see what was going on in the propeller. But when in the middle of the night I was sleeping, so I was still in my pajamas. You have, your partner go in the water, which is overboard, and then under the hull, and the hull slams in the water. So I'm like, oh my God, that was really scary.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I think that's probably one of the scariest things that happened to us at sea, Ryan. That,
Yeah.
and when you had to climb up the mast in the middle of the ocean because one of our lines that was running through the mast had untied itself, so we needed to retrieve it. Um, and I saw my partner dangling up in the air.
I think a lot of times that's what's actually scary is like, because
Yes.
for me going under the boat, it was just something I needed to do, and it wasn't so
Yeah.
scary. You just prepare for it. Same thing with going up the mast. Um, like my scariest thing actually had nothing to do with our boat per se, but this earlier this year I crossed the from the Canaries to Antigua solo. I did it by myself, and as I was leaving, I got from the Canaries. I got called from the Coast Guard to go see about a migrant raft that was out at sea, and I found them, and there was 50 people floating there that were not going to hit land. They were going out into the ocean, and for me that was very scary. So it was, I couldn't rescue those people myself because our boat's not big enough, but I was responsible for kind of keeping track of them while the Coast Guard could get a boat there. And so not only was like I witnessing something very sad, but it was also scary for me because I was trying to keep track of this boat at night and there was no light. You couldn't see them. And I was by myself. It was pretty hard conditions. I was getting really tired because, usually it's at least Sophie and I and crew. And um, so we rely on each other. It's more than a relationship in a way. Like it's like a lot of life and death. Like I literally rely on her while I'm sleeping to keep the boat safe and keep us safe and keep her home safe, and she relies on that for me. But I didn't have her in this situation. It was just me. And so that whole situation was very scary, and it probably was for Sophie too, because she was sitting on land being my shore support, just getting like random phone calls on the satellite phone from me saying like this stuff's going on, and then me randomly hanging up because I have to deal with something. So she's like very scared for me too. And it's kind of like, so it hasn't been storms, it hasn't been, I mean, there are random things. It's more like stuff breaking and us getting put into situations where you have to see your partner, who is more than a partner, like it's literally a person you rely on for your life, have to do something that might scare you. And that for us, I think, has been the hardest bit. Yeah.
Do you often have to sleep at different times because someone has to? Wow, that must be
Yeah.
challenging on its own.
Yeah. The first
We
time we
have
crossed the Atlantic, we really, for two, well, yeah, for 15 days we didn't see each other.
We have good routines. We have good routines for that though. This is
Yeah.
literally what we do.
Yeah.
So for example, I never go to bed without asking Ryan if he is attached to the boat. So we have tether lines that we tether ourselves with. So before we go to bed, every time I go in the cockpit and I ask Ryan, "Are you tethered?" And he'll say yes, and then I can go to sleep.
Right. Oh my God. And I guess at the end of the day, how do you, having had so many things go wrong, all the things that can
Mm.
go wrong, I'm sure you've basically experienced go wrong. How do you get on the boat? Are you both on the boat right now?
So we are not.
No.
Right now, I'm in a co-working space, and that goes in, sometimes you have to find your own space
Yes.
and take advantage of opportunities that arise. So right now we are in the capital of Bermuda, which is Hamilton, and I found a co-working space where I can be focused, have some space to work.
Yes.
And
I'm on the
Ryan is at
boat
the boat.
right now.
And
Yeah.
so, Ryan, you're on the boat. But looking at like when you're next setting off to sail somewhere,
Mm,
knowing there's so much possibility of something going wrong, how do you work that through in your mind? Is it just something you've just
mm,
accepted? Do you just say to yourself, well, I've done all the safety checks, that's all I can do?
mm.
What do you sort of, how do you get your mindset around it?
It's both those things, it's knowing that you are extremely prepared. We are extremely well prepared for every scenario. So every time that we go at sea, we know that we are prepared for everything that can happen. So, you know when Ryan had to swim under the boat in the middle of the ocean at night, it's something that we knew could happen and we had prepared for that scenario. It's just that when it happens, it is so unpleasant to see your loved one, getting into a dangerous spot. Um, but we have run through literally all of the scenarios that can happen, and when they happen, it's not pleasant. So when Ryan ran into a migrant raft, it was very scary. I think that we were mostly scared for those people because they were in really terrible situation. But we had actually run through that scenario before because we knew that it is something that could happen. Um, so that's how we deal with it. We get prepared. We get mentally prepared for anything that can happen.
You said something at the beginning of the call about being a high functioning anxiety, and I'm probably like the poster child for high functioning anxiety. So I have a lot of it, and one
Love
of the
it.
way with that high functioning piece is that to manage the anxiety, I just have to do things, and so doing the things is me thinking through all the scenarios of stuff to happen and trying to figure out ways that we can realistically prepare for them. That's kind of the key. We can't bring an entire second boat with us as a life raft, but there's things that we can do and there's things that we can just claim as being a risk. And that's just how you have to deal with it. But that's that kind of high functioning anxiety with that comes with a lot of discomfort before we go on big passages. So like
Mm.
before Sophie and I left on our first Atlantic crossing, I remember that day. I was so anxious. It was like I didn't even want to exist. I didn't want to be there. It was just I felt so bad as a person just because I was so worried about us and taking us into, well, one of the most remote places of the world, really. And it was just going to be her and I, and we have to deal with it. And I was so anxious about that. And I told her, I'm just really anxious. I can't deal with anything right now. And when we leave, it's going to be fine. I know it because I know myself. And so that's been something I've had to learn to deal with. But it's just been very interesting because we don't get anxious when something bad happens. We just deal with it, and it's just something we deal with. It's more like thinking about stuff that could happen and that anxiety around it. That's like almost been harder to deal with.
That is so beautiful that you've highlighted that because I was thinking that as you were explaining the story, like of, well, as Sophie was telling the story of you going under the boat in that dangerous situation, Ryan, you're the one dealing with it. You're taking action in that moment. When we're actually in a life-threatening moment and we need the fear, the good fear, usually we just respond. If you need to run away
Yeah.
from something, you run. If you need to punch someone in the face, you punch someone in the face.
Yeah.
If you need to speak words or jump into the water, you just do it, and there's not
Mm.
time to psychologically kind of go into all the fear stories of what's the worst case scenario. Whereas Sophie watching you, She
Oh
wasn't
my God.
physically moving in that moment. So you could just watch Ryan and think, what if he doesn't come back up? What's going to happen next? Like all of those thoughts, right? And Ryan, the same thing, just anticipating going versus actually being in it. It's so interesting that so much of it is that imagination just running wild of like all the things that could go wrong, all the just general, oh, this isn't safe and bad, something bad could happen, versus actually being in the moment, which I think just highlights the power of taking action anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, you just got to go sometimes and learn, but learning to deal, I didn't even understand, or I didn't understood that I had an anxiety problem before I started sailing. And I clearly did, looking back on my flying days, because I felt this way then too. But I just felt like, okay, I just feel this way. I'm just a little pumped up about it. This is nothing. Nobody talks about this. So I think this isn't maybe normal, but I don't know. And then,
Yeah.
I got into this world and it was the same thing. And then I'm like, and Sophie has some similar challenges as well. And when I looked at Sophie and then looked at myself, I was like, wait, this isn't like maybe a normal, maybe it is normal actually. And we just as a society have said that it's not, but this is something a lot of people are going through. And I think we should just talk about it. And so that's what Sophie and I have really tried to do more and more with a lot of the content that Sophie produces, is just talk about how we feel, the good and the
Mm.
bad. So
Yeah, because it's
And I
never always
think,
perfect, is
yeah.
it?
And I think that as a society, we should also normalize the fact that not everybody handles anxiety gracefully. Like sometimes
yeah,
it's just not going to look good all the time. You can't just be perfect. You're like, oh no, I'm just going to meditate for 3 minutes right now. Sometimes life does not give you that opportunity to
yeah,
handle anxiety gracefully. It's not always pretty.
Yeah, and it's allowed to be messy, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's not always going to look pretty, and we should normalize that.
yeah, I agree. I love that so much. And so, okay, you've had this amazing adventure. What are some of the things that, well, you're still on it, I know, but like
Mm.
looking back at the naive versions of yourselves, before you left, when you're like, let's just go sailing, this is going to be awesome.
Mhm.
What were some of the things that, uh, you know, maybe you could have told yourself beforehand from like now? If you could tell yourself something then, what would you say to yourself now about it?
Ryan.
I would say it's gonna be okay. Like it's gonna be okay. um it's all gonna work out, even though some days work out better than other days. It's all gonna be okay, because it's just this like fear, and it's been with any project I've done, whether it's climbing mountains or flying airplanes or being on a boat. There's always this fear of like, what if it doesn't work out? And there's been plenty of days that has not worked out, but it's always been okay,
Yeah.
partly because we prepare so well. But it's always been okay. And I think if I just would have known leaving that like it's going to be okay, that would have like lowered the anxiety about 5 levels.
Yeah.
you know
Exactly. At the end of the day, the hardest part is to just take the step, and it doesn't matter if you're looking at going to start an adventure on a sailboat, or starting a business, or quitting your job, or traveling. The hardest part is to do it. Everything else, you're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah,
that's what I would tell myself, my
Yeah. And I think
2015 self.
a big lesson I'm hearing from both of you is like when you're in the life or death situation, you'll figure it out. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
you've got no choice but to try, I
Well,
suppose.
it's kind of
Yeah.
life in general. I think life in general, we all figure out, whether it's life or death or just day to day. We find ways to adapt and go through, but it can be scary sometimes not knowing what that's going to look like. And I think that's what gives a lot of the anxiety, but with people, at least it does with me. And the reality of it is, we're going to be all right
Yeah.
in some way. um so
as
yeah.
as long as you don't get hit by a giant container ship in a small dinghy, you're good.
Exactly. I mean, as you're telling these stories, I'm thinking of Sarah Andrews, who I had on the podcast. She's an Australian and she has this sailing story where she hit a whale in the middle of the night. She was sailing solo off the coast of South America and her boat sank and she was
Oh
out
my
there for
God.
hours and had to be rescued. It's the whole traumatic thing. And it's just making me, I'm fascinated by these stories and what human beings are capable of and the kind of adventures that we can have despite all the anxiety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
It's
thing
pretty
is,
cool human achievement. Yeah.
Yeah.
it can be being hit by a whale in the middle of the ocean, which sounds like pretty badass actually, or it can be hit by a bus on your way to work. You gotta.
Yes. And actually, this is a question I've been wanting to ask you. It's been floating in my head as we've been chatting is, you think about the idea of going and living on a sailboat and you think life would be so different if I did that. And I know
Mhm.
it is in some circumstantial elements, but what are the
Mhm.
things that you've realized are actually just the same about life living on a sailboat versus living anywhere?
Work, you know,
Yeah.
you still got to pay the bills. Ryan and I work a lot. It's the need to have friends, the need to connect socially. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the people that you meet everywhere you go. We all want the same thing. We want a happy life. We want food on the table. We also want to connect with others. All those things, they are the same everywhere, regardless of how you live life and regardless of where you go.
Yes.
I think, yeah, exactly. Everything's the same. It's just, it's not the same. And I mean that by this is that like everyday tasks for us take a lot longer to do. So we have to think about things that you don't think about in a house, like how are we going to get water on the boat? How are we going to do our laundry? The laundry could take 3 days to do because it's so far away, or we have like we can do it on the boat, but it takes forever.
Yeah.
How is the power coming into the boat? Like these things, and it just everything takes a long time, and that gets offset by other things. So we also get to go to amazing places and we see amazing sunsets, and we get to park our boat where everybody looks at and thinks, oh, I wish I could park my boat there. And it would be the same if we lived in a house. So if we live in a house, well, I don't have to worry about where the water's coming from or if the house is going to move in the middle of the night. I guess really bad things would be happening if that happened. But it's like, so all of that goes away. But then, we miss out maybe the other thing. The house doesn't get to move. And so we don't get to see those sunsets. And so it's the same, but it's different, That's what I
Yeah.
mean by that.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think we've always got this idea that, it's going to be better with this circumstance. And it's good in different ways and bad in different ways.
Yeah.
It makes me think of people with children who are like, you know, they might say the same thing. Everything takes so much longer to do. It's so much
Yeah.
Yeah.
longer. I have to think about 10,000 extra things to normal. But of course, then there's the huge joy and fulfillment of raising a human being and all the love that's involved in that as well. And then not having children, okay, you can get things done faster, but maybe that element's not the same in terms of that thing side of things. So it's just, I think what I'm hearing from you guys is this idea, going back to this grass is always greener concept. It's like, it's good but different, and life will always
Yeah.
be good in a different way, no matter what you
Yeah.
choose.
And it's so funny that you mentioned kids, because we often refer to our boat as the kid.
Yeah.
She's a money pit. She takes our sleep away. Everything takes so much longer. Everything needs to be figured out as we go. She came with a manual, but at the end of the day, she has a mind of her own. She decides to brake whenever she wants to. She decides to stop whenever she wants to. The only difference with a kid is that we can get rid of our sailboat. It's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
You can't get rid of your kids once you got
Yeah.
them.
They're
Kind of a
gonna, you're
lifelong.
I mean, you can, it's just not
stuck with
socially
them.
acceptable.
Don't do that. Don't do that. If you are a parent and you have a kid that you want to, don't do that. Absolutely
Yes.
not.
Please don't just get rid of your children. Okay, so what comes next for you guys? What's the upcoming vision? I know you can't think too far ahead, but you mentioned sort of looking at things in 6 month kind of time periods.
We actually have a big life change on the horizon. We are in the process of relocating to the United States.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we've had a green card process in the works for the last year and a half, and we are in the final stages of waiting for the green card's approval. And we are gonna try to grow some roots on the East Coast of the United States and combine like a little bit more of land life with sailing.
So
Have a home base.
You'll still try and do some sailing as well.
It's not that we'll try to do. We are going to continue to sail. What we're going to try to do is have a home base. It's more that way around these days.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, that's so exciting. Is there any like fears in a way, which is interesting because at the start it was like, what are the fears of leaving normal life and going off sailing? Fears of almost coming back to
Oh my God, yes.
some roots. Yeah.
It's the exact same thing, but in reverse. So now we're scared of what going back to land would look like for us. Yeah. We're so used to our lives being nomadic and being very free, especially financially. And now we're looking at maybe buying a house, and we're scared of how that looks like financially. I know that Ryan is a little scared that it means that our sailing adventure is going to stop. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to. It will not. But like every time that you're going through a life change, of course, you're going to have fears and you're going to ask yourself questions. But we know that at this point in life for us, we need to have a place where we can go back to when we need to take a boat break, because that is important for our mental health. So, you know, even if we know that it's good for us, there are absolutely fears associated with that.
Yeah. The brain's just like, what's going to happen? What does that look like?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it never stops.
Yeah, exactly. It never stops. That anxious mind's just going to find a problem with the next
everything.
Thing. No matter what you do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here and speaking with me. It's honestly been such a delight to connect with you and hear your story. And you've got so much wisdom to impart. You know, exploring a different way of life and then coming back and sharing what that's like with people. You know, this sort of is the sort of stuff that people have fantasies about, and here you are saying, well, you know what, there's still life and there's still your anxious mind.
That's right.
It's really beautiful. So for those who are listening and they want to follow along and find you guys, where can they keep in touch?
So we have a YouTube channel on which we talk a lot about how we feel and how life really looks like when you live on a sailboat. It's called Ryan and Sophie Sailing. And generally, if you Google that, you'll find us on Instagram, Facebook. We also have a website, ryanandsophie.com, in which we publish a lot of photos of our travels and stories.
Fabulous. I will have links to that in the show notes so everyone can find it nice and easily. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Georgie.
Yeah,
it was awesome talking to you.
Beautiful. I'll speak to you soon. I look forward to seeing what's next on your adventures.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. If you're ready for the deep dive into this work to master your anxious mind, I invite you to join the Anxiety Reset program. Over 90 days, I'll be guiding you on how to build your mental resilience, reprogram those limiting beliefs that keep you stuck in self-doubt, heal your gut, balance your hormones, nourish your mind, body, and soul. Using a combined approach of naturopathy, nutrition, hypnotherapy, and live group coaching with me, you'll feel supported and motivated to show up for yourself consistently, day after day. And this is how you will experience extraordinary results. You can master your anxious mind. The best time to begin is right now. Let's do it together. You'll find the link to learn more in the show notes. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.